The moment I stepped into the private room at the back of the restaurant, I knew this wasn't the relaxed family brunch my mother had promised. The lighting was too bright, the table too perfectly arranged, and a thick stack of documents sat in the middle beside a pen that clearly wasn't mine. My throat tightened when I noticed a man in a dark suit already seated, laptop open, his attention fixed on me instead of a menu. My mother smiled like everything was completely normal and said we just needed to talk about what was fair after my father's death. My name is Lauren Mitchell. I'm 28 years old, I work remotely in tech, and I know enough about contracts, digital paperwork, and online banking to recognize a setup when I see one. Still, nothing prepared me for hearing that this stranger was her lawyer and that the papers in front of me were already drafted to redistribute my inheritance so everyone could share. He slid the agreement across the table toward me. My mother folded her hands like a judge waiting for a verdict. The rest of the people in the room stared at me as if I were already guilty of something. He said all I had to do was sign and transfer most of what my dad left me for the good of the family. When I refused, the tone changed instantly. The smiles disappeared, the warmth drained out of the room. They started hinting at dragging me into court, ruining my credit, making things very difficult for me if I didn't cooperate. My heart was pounding, but I could hear my dad's voice in the back of my mind, steady, calm, reminding me who actually had the law on their side. I looked around the table, counting slowly under my breath, then out loud. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You're a lot of people. They frowned, confused. That's when I smiled for the first time that day. Funny thing, I said, I only brought one person too. If you want to know who walked in after that and how this little family meeting turned into the worst decision my mother ever made, keep listening. Because I wasn't always the woman sitting in a private room across from a lawyer counting people like chess pieces. For most of my life, I was just a kid from a quiet suburb outside San Diego. Someone who thought family meant game nights, grocery runs, and my dad's terrible jokes about JavaScript. My dad, Michael Mitchell, was a software engineer at a small tech firm. He was the kind of guy who packed leftovers for lunch and drove the same old sedan for years because, as he liked to say, it still works. My mom hated that. She wanted the house in a gated community, the new hybrid in the driveway, the Instagram vacations that made everyone else jealous. When I was 15, the gap between them finally split open. I still remember the night they sat me down at the kitchen table. My dad had a stack of printed bank statements neatly lined up. My mom had a tablet open to a Pinterest board full of vacation homes. She said she was tired of just getting by. He said he was tired of pretending they could afford a life they didn't have. California is a community property state, which basically meant the court looked at everything they had built together and sliced it straight down the middle. My mom saw it as a chance to finally upgrade her life. My dad saw it as losing half of everything he had worked for and somehow still being responsible for alimony and child support. After the divorce, I stayed mostly with my dad in a modest condo near Encinitas. It wasn't fancy, but if I opened my bedroom window at night, I could hear the ocean. On Fridays, he let me pick dinner from DoorDash, and we'd eat straight from the containers while watching Netflix on the couch. He showed me how budgeting apps worked, explained what a 401k was, and why credit scores mattered more than designer bags. While other kids' parents bragged about new cars, my dad bragged about paying off his credit card every month. My mom, on the other hand, moved north to Orange County and seemed to reinvent herself overnight. She married David, a smooth-talking real estate agent who specialized in homes that looked like they belonged on reality TV. Suddenly, her social media was full of backyard barbecues, wine tastings, and perfect lighting. She had 2 new kids in her life, Ava and Ryan, and they all wore matching outfits in Christmas photos. I was technically still her daughter, but most days I felt like a guest star in the perfect family she was trying to build. Every time I scrolled past her posts, it was the same thing. So proud of my amazing family. Blessed. living our best life. I was never in the pictures. She didn't call to ask how my exams went or what I wanted to do after high school. She called to tell me Ava made varsity or Ryan won some tournament. The only time my name came up was when she complained to my dad about money. My dad would come home from those calls a little quieter, a little more tired, but he always bounced back. He'd turn on an old movie and make popcorn on the stove, like nothing could touch him. On weekends, we went hiking through local canyons or drove up the coast for cheap day trips. He'd point out the big houses on the cliffs and say, "People get obsessed with these, but they still go to bed with the same problems as everyone else." He kept our life simple, but it felt honest. At night, when I worried that I was somehow the reason everything fell apart, he'd sit at the edge of my bed and say, "You don't owe anyone your future just because they share your last name. Build something real, something that belongs to you." Back then, it sounded dramatic, like something a movie dad would say. I didn't know he was quietly meeting with a lawyer, updating paperwork, making sure that if anything ever happened to him, I wouldn't be at the mercy of my mother's idea of fair. I thought the worst part of my life was already behind me once the divorce was finalized and everyone moved on. I had no idea that one late-night drive years later would take my dad away and turn those quiet money lessons into a full-blown war. When you grow up with a dad who double-checks seatbelts and reroutes around traffic just to be safe, you never think a car accident is how his story ends. But that's exactly what happened. One rainy Tuesday night, he was driving down Interstate 5 after staying late at work to finish a software release. A drowsy driver drifted across lanes, there was a chain reaction, and by the time Highway Patrol called me, my dad was already gone. The world went silent in that way it does when someone pulls the plug on your entire life. The funeral was small and simple, just like he would have wanted. A few coworkers from his tech company, a couple of neighbors from the condo building, and me standing there trying to breathe around the knot in my chest. My mom showed up, dressed in black like a movie widow. David was at her side. Ava and Ryan stood a little behind them, like props. She cried loudly enough for everyone to hear, hugging people she hadn't spoken to in years, telling anyone who would listen how heartbroken she was. I stood next to my dad's urn, thinking, "You didn't love this man. You loved the life he couldn't give you." After the service, while people drifted toward the parking lot, a woman in a navy blazer and sensible heels approached me. She introduced herself as Rachel Thompson, my dad's attorney. We sat at a metal picnic table outside the church, the air heavy with flowers and coffee. She explained that my dad had been thorough, painfully thorough. He'd updated his will more than once after the divorce. He'd been concerned about pressure from my mother. That was her polite way of saying he knew my mom would come for his money the moment he was gone. According to the will, everything that was unquestionably his separate property after the divorce, plus everything he built afterward, went to me. The condo in Encinitas, his tech stocks, some Apple, some index funds, his IRA and 401k rollovers. It wasn't billionaire money. It was the careful, solid wealth of a man who spent his whole life being responsible. I should have felt guilty hearing it all went to me. Instead, I felt sad and strangely proud, like he'd managed to protect me even from beyond the grave. Rachel explained the California probate process. The court would validate the will, oversee the transfers, and make sure no one could challenge it with real legal grounds. She looked me straight in the eye and said, "Your father was very clear. He wanted you to have control of your future without interference." The word interference hung in the air like a storm cloud. Right on cue, my phone buzzed. A text from my mom. A long paragraph about how we need to talk, how your father would want you to think about the whole family, how we should handle his estate like adults. She didn't ask how I was holding up. She asked when we could discuss numbers.
After the will was read, everything changed. People who hadn't called me in years suddenly remembered my number. My Uncle Mark started showing up at my apartment unannounced, always smiling too much, always pretending he was just checking in. My Aunt Diane called every night, reminding me how stressful estate matters could be and how I'd probably need family guidance to handle them. I didn't trust any of it. Dad had warned me. Months before he died, he'd told me quietly, if something happens to me, don't sign anything unless a lawyer you trust explains it. I remembered his voice every time someone pushed a paper toward me. They pushed a lot. One afternoon, Mark brought documents to a cafe in downtown Columbus. He said they were standard probate forms. I noticed how his hand shook when I asked why my lawyer's name wasn't on them. He laughed it off, said I was being paranoid, said grief was messing with my judgment. That's when I knew something was wrong. A week later, my cousin Ryan tried a different approach. He sent me a long message saying Dad had promised the house to him, not me. He said Dad had only changed the will because I manipulated him near the end. Reading that made my stomach turn. I hadn't even been in town most of that year. Then things got darker. I started noticing a car parked across the street from my apartment late at night. Same gray sedan, no plates I could see. When I walked my dog, it was gone. When I came back, it was there again. Maybe it was nothing, but my gut said otherwise. My lawyer confirmed something unsettling. Someone had already tried to file a different will with the county, a forged one, dated 2 years earlier. It left almost everything to Mark. That's when fear turned into anger. I installed cameras, I stopped answering family calls, I documented everything. Texts, voicemails, missed calls, sudden visits. One night, around 1:40 a.m., someone tried to open my back door. The camera caught a hooded figure, face hidden, leaving after 30 seconds. The next morning, Mark texted me, "You don't have to do this the hard way." I forwarded that message straight to my attorney. From that moment on, it wasn't just about inheritance. It was about proving the truth. The court date was set. Subpoenas been out, and suddenly the same people who were pressuring me were begging me to talk things out privately. I didn't respond, because if Dad taught me anything, it was this: silence is power when the truth is on your side.
The courtroom was colder than I expected. I sat at the wooden table beside my attorney, hands folded, listening as my family entered one by one. Mark avoided my eyes. Diane kept whispering to Ryan. They looked confident, almost smug, as if they were sure this would end in their favor. The judge called the case. Their lawyer spoke first. He claimed my father had been confused in his final years. He said I had isolated him. He presented the forged will like it was a buried truth finally coming to light. Then my lawyer stood up. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't dramatize anything. She just laid out facts, slowly, carefully, one by one. Medical records showing my father was mentally sound. Security footage timestamps proving I wasn't even in the state when they claimed I manipulated him. Handwriting analysis that confirmed the alternate will was fake. Phone records showing Mark had contacted a document preparer weeks before Dad died. Then came the messages, the texts, the late-night threat, the attempted break-in. When the video played in court, the hooded figure at my back door, Mark shifted in his seat. Ryan stared straight ahead. Diane started crying. The judge asked Mark to stand. He denied everything. His voice cracked halfway through. When asked why his fingerprints were on the forged document folder, he had no answer. The room went silent. After a brief recess, the judge returned. The ruling was clear. The forged will was dismissed. The original will was upheld, and the court ordered an investigation into fraud and intimidation. I didn't feel relief right away. What I felt was exhaustion. Outside the courthouse, Mark tried to approach me. A bailiff stepped between us. He called my name, said we were still family, said this went too far. I looked at him and realized something important.
Family doesn't try to steal from you. Family doesn't scare you into silence. Family doesn't wait for you to be grieving to strike. I walked past him without saying a word. Months later, the house was finally mine. I kept it not for the money, but because it was the one place I still felt close to Dad. I planted a tree in the backyard where he used to sit with his coffee every morning. Some relatives stopped calling completely. Others sent apologies that felt more like excuses. I didn't respond. I didn't need to, because the truth doesn't need defending once it's proven, and sometimes losing people shows you exactly who they were all along.